Welcome to BIV Today. I'm Tyler Orton. Now, the federal Liberals, they unveiled their first budget in more than 2 years today on Monday, April 19th. And we're seeing everything from an extension of benefits for businesses hard hit by the pandemic to efforts to offer $10 a day for childcare. But with us to hone in on what Budget 2021 means for the country's high-tech innovation economy, it is Benjamin Bergen. He is the executive director of the Council of Canadian Innovators. Benjamin, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, Tyler, so much for having me.
So one of the things that jumps out to me here, though, is I sense like a very strong emphasis on, clean tech, the green economy here. One of the things that we saw with U.S. President Joe Biden's proposed $2 trillion U.S. infrastructure plan is, the big emphasis on kind of the green economy and clean tech as well. I'm wondering just kind of initial thoughts here. Do you think Canada kind of realizes that if we're not jumping on board with what the Americans are doing, if we're not keeping pace, then we really do risk losing out on a lot of the kind of those positive spillover effects that we could see not only for the environment, but for the economy as well?
Yeah, no, very much so. So I think it's a great question. And I think if you look at it in terms of where the economy is going, this budget really does two things. One, obviously works to sort of mitigate some of the challenges around COVID that we're obviously still experiencing as a country. This third wave really being sort of unprecedented. And then it looks at where are we going to go to the future. And I think your point on the green economy side is very much in keeping with the Biden administration and will hopefully be able to keep Canada able to actually commercialize products and get it moving closer towards actually achieving prosperity through growing the economy, especially sort of in the green sector of things.
Well, from your perch, over at the council, what's your overall take on how well this budget kind of balances kind of the needs of, the sectors that you guys are advocating for right now?
So the big areas that we're really seeing are sort of in kind of four key buckets. So really, the way that we're sort of looking at things right now is obviously on the talent side, we're definitely seeing a real commitment by the federal government to really help train and reskill Canadians for the new economy. And so you're seeing, hundreds of millions of dollars being, pumped into re-education programs in terms of, upskilling and just diversifying general skills, which I think is a real positive step, especially coming out of COVID. A lot of Canadians will be looking for new positions, new jobs. On the funding side, you're seeing lots of money for really supporting scaling technology companies. So $7.2 billion in SIF funding, which is the Strategic Innovation Fund for your listeners. And that's to really try and help companies scale and grow their businesses. You're also seeing funding specifically, as you mentioned, for clean tech, but also for health technology companies as well. Additional pools of money put away to help Canada try and expand and grow in those areas. And then the other two areas we're seeing some real significant uptake is definitely around access to customers. So here the government is committing about $2.6 billion towards helping businesses digitize and modernize their current structure in terms of how they're operating and running. And I think that will really help, obviously, the economy in terms of being able to be more efficient and really move towards sort of the next digital step. And then the last piece where we're seeing some real positive signs as well is definitely around the government really focusing on IP education. So intellectual property, often sort of in the weeds and not sort of viewed as sexy, but that really is where wealth and prosperity comes from in an innovation economy. So by being able to train and have that expertise in IP, and you're seeing the government commit $75 million to that, is a real opportunity, I think, for Canada to help position itself going forward.
I'm thinking about some of the other incentives here, though, and the budget proposes a reduction of up to 50% in corporate taxes for businesses that are manufacturing, zero emissions technology. And I'm wondering if like these kinds of initiatives, they are going to work with regards to incentivizing these companies to kind of pursue what I think the government wants to see more, which is kind of stuff that's going to be helpful towards the environment, while also, spurring activity within the economy too.
Yeah, so look, tax incentives are a good way of getting innovators to move where you want in terms of one, actually producing and adopting technologies. And so I think that this is a good measure. I think one of the things that we often get with these budget documents is that they're very much, sort of an outline, and it really needs a bit more coloring in order to determine how some of these actual policies will be implemented. So that's one in particular where we're definitely going to watch and see what ultimately sort of the details are in terms of how that will be effective.
Well, one of the things I'll pick your brain a little bit about this kind of on a broader level, though, but is our efforts to accelerate the commercialization of clean technologies. The angle here with regards to British Columbia in the budget, though, is that Ottawa is putting $35 million towards a center for innovation and clean energy that'll be based here in the province. They'll be working with Victoria to get this done. But where would you say that Canada is overall with regards to efforts to really get the commercialization process going at this point?
Yeah, so in Canada, we're really good at sort of the invention of clean technology, i.e. our universities are amazing research facilities and really good at producing sort of basic research on these things. Where we often fall down really is in the commercialization of the idea. And have really struggled as a country to sort of move ideas into tangible assets, or IP, which can then be sold globally. And so a fund like this, which is really going to try and help Canada commercialize its clean technology, is really critical in order to actually pay for the social programs that we care about, because that's actually how you get the return on investment, right? In the actual commercializing of the actual products which we're inventing as a country. So this is a really, I think a good step forward for the government, because it does indicate that they really understand that we have to be able to actually produce a return on investment in order to actually continue to pay for the programs that we care about.
Yeah, I was going to bring up that very point because, like, we're in a kind of deficit budget at this point, and that's what the finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, mentioned today. So, well, let's expand kind of the revenue coming in by, incentivizing these companies to, do well here. And, so that's kind of an interesting thing that I can put my head around as well. The other thing that jumps out to me, though, is, a $2.2 billion being allocated for things in biomanufacturing, life sciences. And I just think over the last, maybe year or two with regards to Vancouver-based companies, like you've got Accelera, you've got Zymeworks, they're really coming to the forefront here. Was kind of life sciences being kind of like a forgotten child for a little bit too long? Are people finally catching up to just what a boon to the economy this could be moving forward?
Yeah, so I think very much, obviously, the pandemic has shined the light on this sector of the economy, without a doubt. And I think you originally saw, market capital marshal towards that area in Canada. Obviously, seeing the IPO of AB Accelera and some of the other companies that you've mentioned, not only in British Columbia but also in Quebec as well. And so I think this is the government's commitment to double down and to support that sector of the economy. So I think this is encouraging news, because it does indicate the government understands, where the economy is moving, and potentially really an opportunity to double down on winners, right? We often don't want governments picking, winners and losers, but we do have a number of firms in this area which have really been leading globally, and so the government's commitment to this, I think, is a positive step for sure.
Yeah, and look, I spoke to Ali Tarani. He's the CEO of Zymeworks, I think just last week. And the conversation centered on the fact, like, the more of these kind of anchors you can get going, it's just going to draw that much more talent. From there, you'll get more spinoffs and everything. So it is kind of one of those things that just accelerates if you're getting the right kind of investment in it. Is that kind of been your experience, just observing the industry?
Yeah, no, very much so. So, I mean, having, large anchor companies is really critical for the creation of a sector in the country, right? So by being able to build some really successful global players here in Canada, that really is how we will secure not only those sectors, but also wealth creation, right? So it really is in the ownership of the intellectual property and the data that ultimately generates wealth. And in a capitalist structure, it's the firm that ultimately holds that IP and that data. So we have to have some headquartered companies here in Canada that are really winning in these fields in order to be generating, the hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue in order to be taxed and ultimately, pay for social programs that we as Canadians care about.
I'm curious, was there anything that was not included in budget 2021 that you would have liked to have seen?
So this is a very large document, and candidly, we've only had sort of about an hour and 20 minutes so far on it. So, still really combing through it. But one area where I did see sort of a lack of framework or kind of focus was definitely around open banking. So Canada and Vancouver more specifically has some of the most amazing fintech companies in really the world, to be quite candid. And we have just seen sort of a slowing of Ottawa in order to deal with how open banking can allow these fintech companies to expand, grow, and ultimately become successful firms for this country. So we would have liked to definitely seen the government move forward more on some of the open banking consultations that they've had over the last 18 months, and it not being in there was a bit of a miss for us.
Is the concern that, like, if we move to industry is just going to pass us by on the world stage when we've got other countries that are really accelerating those efforts?
Very much so. I mean, where you're seeing a lot of innovation happening in fintech and specifically is obviously in the United States, things like Venmo, just as something easy that we as consumers can relate to, but also in the UK as well, right? Really successful firms are being generated and created, and there is a big concern here that the way that our banking structure is set up, that we will see innovation being occurring around us and ultimately, lead to potential loss of market share for our own Canadian firms and a lack of their ability to go global.
Just because I want to be, arbitrary and reductive today, if you had to give the budget a letter grade in terms of what it means for innovation here in Canada, where would you place this one?
So I'm not a letter grade fan, so I will not actually take that challenge. But look, I think that the positive thing that we're seeing in this document is an understanding of the government on some of the major tools that are needed to build an innovation economy. So we're seeing that with how they're approaching intellectual property. We're seeing that how they're actually even approaching the Competition Bureau, setting aside $96 million to help Canada deal with, trust and marketplace issues, which, has been dominating the world right now, thinking about things like Facebook, in Australia and in Europe. So I think that there's some really good steps that the government's taking, and we'll continue to come through it and let you know more of the positive results as we determine them.
I'll leave you off with this one. One of the things that I think everybody's just seen as inevitable, but taxes on digital services for revenue generated here in Canada. We'll have service taxes, for those platforms, those e-commerce warehouses. Was, this just something that inevitably was going to happen here in Canada?
So, it might be kind of contrary, but as a business association, we were actually in favor of the digital service taxes. They're really needed for a tax fairness balance here in the country. So, Canadian firms are already, paying specific taxes. And what we haven't seen is that tax fairness to, large platform companies and other providers. And so we actually welcome this news. I think it's very much in keeping with what Europe has done. If you even look at the way that the line in the budget is structured, it's 3% of revenue for firms at over 750 million euros. And kind of interesting that they chose, the euros mark, not USD. So, I think that this very much was needed and does signal that the government understands that tax generation is going to need to come through different formats in a digital economy, because the traditional, income tax and corporate tax is not really sufficient in an economy where revenue is generated globally and often isn't even created in the domicile country.
Well, excellent. Benjamin, I really do appreciate you joining us and just offering your insights here on the budget that was released today, April 19th. As you say, as we're recording it's only been about an hour, so there's still lots to absorb here. But I just want to thank you so much for taking the time.
Great. Thanks so much.
That's Benjamin Bergen. He is Executive Director of the Council of Canadian Innovators. And that is it for the show today. But we will be back tomorrow on Tuesday with more. Until then, you can go to BIV.com. There's more stories there. There are more interviews there. For now, I want to thank everyone for listening. And I am Tyler Orton.